Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, a show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports, business, media, industrial complex. Joining me today, deep from the pandemic bunker in Texas, is Steve. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing my best to rebel against the pandemic bunker, but it's getting harder and harder every day to continue to rebel, unfortunately. How are you doing up in the epicenter of madness in New York?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. We made a wise decision 10 years ago to continue to rent in the city and purchase a home in the Catskills, the country, upstate, depending on how you say it. Which, we always did basically because we like leisure, and I particularly like to drink canned beer in a raft on a lake on a warm summer day. But having lived through 9/11, the great East Coast blackout, and Superstorm Sandy, the idea of having an escape pad seemed pertinent. So we have taken advantage of our thank you past selves and take deeply socially isolating. But yeah, it's crazyville. I mean, there are 20 cases in my county here already, and New York City is going to be a real S show here coming up if it isn't already.
Yeah, my area down in the Houston suburbs is dramatically different than what you're describing. It's the population density is a lot less. There are a couple cases down here, and then that's kind of it. It's just a much different attitude and much different vibe, and part of that is probably causes my my natural contrarian tendencies to minimize the effect of this pandemic to a certain extent. But yeah, it's dramatically different, down where I am. Nobody down here is just not that worried about it. I went and had dinner in a restaurant yesterday. I was the only one there. I knew the owner, so he sat down and chit-chatted with me about it. But there's other restaurants down here where people are eating in the dining room, for example. It's just a dramatically different. It just lends me to think that, gosh, this just it's not as big a deal, It's, we're exaggerating this, and to a certain extent, I think we are. But all the same, it's, the fact that it's so different where you are just goes to show that, I think the greater the population density, the bigger the problem, which isn't exactly newsflash,
Yeah, and, you don't have problems yet, so that's one thing.
Well, I do think to a certain extent, the whole situation is a bit over-exaggerated because, the simple fact of the matter is the overwhelming odds are everybody's going to be fine. People need to remember that. The overwhelming odds are you're going to be fine. Even if you get the thing, you may be sick for a while, and then a couple days, and then you're going to be okay. As long as you're not in a high-risk category. You have you have an immune system deficiency. You're elderly, that kind of thing. For the most part, there's no reason to panic. It's extremely inconvenient. There's no doubt about that. But I've used the term zombie apocalypse. In some fun here over the past few days, but that's not going to happen. It's going to be inconvenient, and then at some point it's going to end. That's my view of it. Just we need to take appropriate precautions for now, but I don't think it's worth tanking the entire economy over, quite honestly. I mean, at some point, this is going to be okay for a couple weeks, but you can't just shut the whole United States economy down for months at a time. I mean, you can't. Something's going to have to change.
Well, one, I think the best case, it's the sort of irony is the best case scenario is that in 2-3 months, everyone eye rolls about the overreaction, mostly because that means that the overreaction worked in terms of minimizing the spread and devastation. So that's kind of the funny irony about the whole thing. I think it was Dr. Fauci said it the other day, right? He said, we would only hope that this seemed if it seems overbearing later, it means it did its job. So that's a interesting thing. Also, if 1 or 2% of people who get it die, it's still talking about millions of people. So that's big. But some of the smart scientists and network theorists that I've been reading do say that if this works, the best case scenario of this working is that they might be able to relax the broad social isolation in a month and move to quarantine of the either the sick or the most vulnerable in a way that lets a large majority of life, economic and otherwise, get back to normal. But you got to live through this to be able to know with some kind of sophistication who you need to quarantine and let other people go on about their lives. So, hey, we'll see. It's about the only thing right now that can be said.
Well, I mean, it's a fact that the country can't sustain sort of mass social isolation for very long. I can't. I mean, economically, it can't. I mean, even the federal government can't just, pay everybody's living expenses, which nobody's even expecting them to do. But even if they wanted to, they literally couldn't do that for very long without tanking, the United States credit and everything else. The interesting thing is, the guy I had dinner with yesterday in his restaurant, it's a little local burger place. Support your local businesses because they're really hurting. If you can. But he's a South Korean national, immigrated to the United States, opened a burger place, and he showed me an email that he got from a friend of his in South Korea. It was in Korean. He had to translate, but what it was a transcript from a cell phone of an individual in South Korea who had been infected by the virus. The government had pulled the transcript of his locations, and they knew exactly where he had been for the past however long, and then they had gone to every place he had been and isolated all those people, disinfected everything, and so they knew exactly. Here in the United States, number one, it's illegal. The government can't just go without a warrant, can't go pull your locations out of a cell phone. And I asked him about that, and he said South Korea they can't either, except in times of emergency. But I think that's sort of what South Korea has done is they've kind of let everybody live their lives, but when somebody gets infected, they've really cracked down hard on those people in a way that we just can't and won't do in the United States. It was interesting that he showed me that.
No, I mean, yeah, South Korea is definitely, going to come out of this looking like one of the smarter countries about how to control this, and has started to see at least for this wave, their daily cases start to drop. Although the places like that have seen that, mostly in Asia, where you've seen the downtrend, now they're worried about it coming from other countries back to them. So we'll see. Most pandemic experts and the modeling and the historical precedents, say that there's usually multiple waves of this. So, we'll see.
I mean, I do think that, for example, the state of California, the governor has issued what he's calling a stay-home order. I'd like to know what sort of constitutional authority that governor thinks he has to order people to be trapped in their homes. I mean, this is not a totalitarian country. It's not, communism. It's not a socialist authoritarian government. And I don't know if nobody's going to fight him over it right now, but I don't know if he has the authority to just, as a governor, order people to not leave their property.
Well, also, I was
and
also
it really bothers me.
It's a pretty toothless act, though.
Like, no doubt, because he doesn't really have the authority to do it.
So it's as much about messaging and as it is about actual policy.
But it's one thing to say, okay, the state of California highly recommends and asks and begs everybody to just stay in their homes for these reasons. That's one thing. But to come out and say everybody's ordered to do it, I think really sends a wrong message. In a bbig picture kind of standpoint.
Yeah, but then you get a spring day or, spring breakers in Florida, and you've got, hundreds of thousands of people congregating in parks or beaches. I mean,
nobody's saying that's a good idea. But I think there's a way to message it, as you said, in a way that doesn't sound like we're talking about the 1972 USSR, which is everybody's ordered to stay in their homes, sounds like to me. It's just my natural anti-government, anti-big government bent coming out.
Ah, yes, the battle of free will versus public good.
Absolutely, 100% free will. I'm all for it, man. The sports world has a huge, has taken a huge hit too, though, Chris.
That's right. Yes, and they have been and really kind of at the front end of an industry in terms of reacting to this. So super interesting, because I think, I mean, between the NHL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and a bunch of other stuff, they'd pretty much shut down before majority of U.S. industry, widely speaking.
Yeah, I thought it was a dramatic, unnecessary overreaction myself. The NBA, the NBA seemed to be at the forefront. One could argue that Rudy Gobert has collapsed the American economy. You know, I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but the Rudy Gobert incident was really what kind of kick-started all of the reactions from the entire sports world. Because if to go back, what, 2 weeks, Gobert was the one that in a press conference all of a sudden grabbed every reporter's microphone and notebook and licked stuff. And, even I, who doesn't get too worried about health stuff, think that's just absurd. And he ended up donating $500,000 to charity to kind of make up for his stupidity. But he was the one who was at first diagnosed with the coronavirus, and that was what caused the NBA to suspend their season. Apparently the backstory behind him is he had been around a lot of people from high risk areas, and then he got sick, and that's why they tested him, because he in particular had been exposed to a lot of people. And then he exposed a couple of his Jazz teammates. What, two of them, I think, came down with it. Four people on the Lakers have come down with it. But the NBA acted immediately and shut everything down. I don't know. Again, I kind of thought it was a bit of a overreaction. Why can't you play games without fans? For example, why can't you test everybody, isolate the people who have it, and then continue on and play games without fans? Because there's a huge economic impact, on the NBA, on the networks, on a lot of things. There's a trickle down effect.
Oh, right. I think that the knock-on effects we'll be talking about for months and years. But that night was actually interesting for me because my little brother, who has an excellent podcast about George Mason basketball called By George, and is part of the Play to Win team podcast and videocast. He was actually
Plug.
in.
Listen to it. By George.
That's right. He was actually in Brooklyn with his By George team, basically to cover the Atlantic 10 tournament. He's got full press pass, whatever. He's done that for like the last 4 or 5 years. So we met him out at my friend's bar and restaurant, Sidecar in Brooklyn, delivering food and cocktails.
Plug.
And we were all hanging out there, and it was already, kind of front of mind story and whatever. But as we sat there, the Rudy Gobert hit, Tom Hanks hit, the A10 tournament canceled fans, all of their partners and spouses and wives were blowing up their phones, come home now, come home now. So we were sort of sitting communally in this bar as the entire thing collapsed, and his phone was just blowing up. And then he said he felt like he was at the epicenter of the breakout, because then he attended the A10's cancellation press conference at Barclays in Brooklyn, which was also the same time that Kansas and Duke pulled out of the tournament. And basically, so he was a member of the press sitting there watching the A10 tournament get canceled, which basically the full NCAA tournament was in the process of getting canceled. He said it was a surreal experience.
Well, and we're going to get to the NCAA. By the way, we're not just rambling here, folks. We actually have an agenda. We're going to sort of go through the economic impact of this on the various sports and and also the NCAA, which frankly may have the most devastating impact, of any sport, I think. Again, it's certainly a surreal day. I don't know why the NBA couldn't have taken a 2 week break, tested everybody, isolated those who need to be isolated, and then just played games. I don't know why that couldn't happen, because, here's the thing. By the way, if you want to read more about what we're about to talk about sort of collectively, there's an article on 538.com that is called... What is it called, Chris? I don't have it up. Okay, wait, while you're looking that up, the New York Times has one called "The Financial Blow of the Coronavirus on Sports." Yeah, ESPN has a detailed thing about the NBA. How the NBA moved quickly on coronavirus testing, and then the 538 article is
The coronavirus's economic effect on sports could be staggering.
there you go, from March 16th. So collectively, the information we're talking about has largely come from those three articles. But so the NBA is about an $8 billion a year thing, and of that, about 25% comes from local ticket revenue. The rest of it comes from media and then merchandise sales. So for the NBA, if you cancel 25% of the season, you lose 25% of 25%, which basic math tells you is 1/16th, which is doable. Yeah, which is a lot of money, but still doable. But to the idea of not having 21 games where the networks could claim a force majeure event and just not pay them, now you're talking about real money, even in the NBA. Force majeure is a concept that's in a lot of contracts, especially a lot like commercial leasing, that says, hey, if some act of God, natural disaster, wartime, a flood, a hurricane, illness, pandemic happens, and we can't broadcast these games or you can't play them, we don't have to pay you. That's basically what a force majeure says. So if the NBA has to, in the worst case scenario, cancel the remaining quarter of the season and then can't play the playoffs, you're talking about loss of easily hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think if you add it all up, we're up to over $1 billion in losses from the NBA. So I mean, and that in turn then will have a dramatic effect on next year's salary cap. Because the salary cap is based on annual revenues. They've had a projection. The projection is going to be way off, and don't forget they already lost money from China already. And so it's going to be a pretty devastating hit. And so I don't know why the NBA couldn't just take precautions, but then start playing some games and broadcast them, even if they have to play in like team training centers.
Well, how would the NBA have dealt with teams like the Lakers or the Brooklyn Nets that would have been
I
at
think you have to take
three-quarters capacity?
You have to take a break. There's no doubt. You had to take a break at a minimum to get everybody tested. Excuse me, sorry, I was choked up there for a minute. You have to take a break and get everybody tested, and we're going to get to how they did that, by the way, here in a minute. Isolate those who need to be isolated, but after that, is there a reason why they couldn't start playing games again? Again, in maybe not arenas, but gyms. Because every team has full court capacity, and they broadcast from there sometimes. Every team, local media does, from training camps and all that stuff. So I don't know why they couldn't have taken 3 weeks and then just started playing again. Like the UFC has not stopped. For example, the UFC just Dana White came out and said, "Hey, I talked to the vice president and the president, and they told me to take precautions and continue to move on." And so Dana White had his UFC event, whatever number it is, in Brazil a week ago, for example.
But they have canceled. They have canceled 3 upcoming events.
I think it's largely because they don't have venues, more so than anything else. Because he's talked about holding events in like the UFC training centers, for example. And I think his point here is sort of what I'm saying, which is you eliminate the crowds, you make sure all your people are healthy. I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I'm an advocate for getting life going, but for the NBA, it's a lot of money you're talking about, a lot of money. So tell me I'm wrong or right, Chris.
I think you're. It's not a right or wrong answer, right?
No,
Basically.
it's not.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the right answer is. I think that I'd probably fall on the side of over precaution, and a lot of the stuff we talk about with the NBA comes from this ESPN article about the NBA's preparedness, which basically follows a thread of a story that we've talked about at least since I guess probably September or October, whenever the China controversy happened. But because of their deep business relationships with China, they had a bunch of early warning signs. And so Adam Silver and the NBA basically were ahead of this in terms of purchasing tests, having contingency plans. So I think the speed in which the NBA reacted was mostly because they were kind of on the knife's edge already with this, which is super fascinating. And brings it maybe their China story full circle, although both versions of them are going to cost them billions. Yeah, I don't know what the right thing is. I guess I was surprised. I mean, when we had our show 2 weeks ago, which was sort of at the beginning of this, at least as an American context, I think I predicted we'd see games with no fans here very soon.
You did, yeah. And I laughed at you over it, by the way.
And we did see. So I was both right and wrong at the same time because we jumped right over. We actually never did see games with no fans, right? They jumped right to the end game in both of these scenarios. It makes you wonder. The thing that's scary, considering how greed driven, and I don't even necessarily mean that with a ton of malice, but that these giant sports leagues are. To see them fold up that quick, you wonder not only how are they getting the testing kits, but what kind of intelligence and information do they have that would allow them that would make them react that quick. So I take the canary in the coal mine at its face value on some of those things, because for them to basically seed billions, they must have been pretty spooked.
Yeah, I think I don't have a way to qualitatively measure this, but one could argue that this has been the most difficult NBA season, at least in my lifetime, for the league. Because if you think back to it, the year started with the China controversy in the first place. That happened in preseason because the Lakers and the Nets were stuck in China when Daryl Morey had his famous tweet that we talked about. So that was the first thing. Then David Stern died. That took up a ton of league attention. Then Kobe Bryant got tragically killed. That took up a ton of attention. And then this coronavirus thing happened right. The very first warnings that the NBA got happened in mid-January, which is what Chris is talking about. When they're getting information from China because of their relationship with China. So they were dealing with the Kobe Bryant event, which, trust me, if you didn't pay attention to it, was a major, major thing for the NBA. And then that went straight into this. So they've had one thing after another. It's just been a really awful, awful season. I'm just one that I don't like things messing. I try. I'm an advocate of keeping as much of a sense of normalcy as possible. And so the idea of you brought up an interesting point of how the league just instantly folded up the tents. I don't know why they couldn't have said we're taking a break. We're going to reevaluate this and we're going to get everybody tested. We've planned for this. Don't apologize for it. You guys took precautions, the rest of us didn't. Test everybody in the NBA, and we're going to take a 3-week break, and then we will reevaluate at that time. Instead, what they said was, we're just indefinitely shutting things down. I think what they should have told the public, and then what they should have planned for was, we are taking a break of a limited time period, and at the end of that time period, we will announce what our next step is. And they didn't do that. They just kind of said, we're shut down indefinitely. That's the part I don't agree with.
Yeah, well, I'm sure books will be written eventually.
There's going to be movies, and
yeah.
But as if anybody wants to relive this.
Yeah.
The coronavirus movie.
Steve, just admit that you're bitter and angry because you finally accepted and begun to like Kobe Bryant as a player and on the Lakers.
Kobe Bryant?
And
you mean LeBron James?
I mean, yeah. Sorry, yes, my bad. LeBron James and your potential and probable at least finals appearance by the Lakers has been stolen from you.
Oh, that's certainly part of it. And let me tell you, about the LeBron James thing, I wasn't even really on the LeBron James train even at the beginning of the season.
No, it was like mid-season.
What changed my mind about him really wasn't his play on the court. It was how he handled the death of Kobe Bryant. I thought he really showed a lot of team leadership. He said all the right things. I thought his actions and his words in the wake of Kobe's death were really the first time that I thought this dude belongs with the Los Angeles Lakers. That was what turned my mind about him, was the way he acted after Kobe died. And that was the first time I've been on board with him. So now, yeah, I'm kind of, my begrudging fandom has turned into like a legitimate admiration for him as a Los Angeles Laker. True, and yes, I am very bitter that this is a year that they're definitely the favorites to come out of the West at a minimum, and they're probably number 2 behind the Milwaukee Bucks, probably in odds to win the championship. But this is the year, and then this season ends. So yeah, that irritates me, to no end, no doubt. Just beyond that, though, again, I think the world has sort of collectively overreacted. I think the NBA especially overreacted. The MLB, same thing. Just cancel everything, and with no. I think people do a lot better from a psychological standpoint when there's a plan and an end game, right? So if you tell people we're taking a 3-week break, or we're going to have you hibernate in your house for 2 weeks, and then we will reevaluate at that time, with a new plan, people do better than just go away forever and we'll get back to you. That doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and I think the NBA was sort of at the forefront of the panic because the country's panicked. Can we at least admit that? Everybody's panicked. And the NBA kind of started the panic train, panic ball world. They're the ones that kicked the ball down the hill, so to speak, because after they acted, everybody else acted too. I just think if they had kind of taken a different approach, we might not be where we are now, or at least it would have taken longer to get there.
They were definitely, regardless of whether you think it was the right thing, the wrong thing, whatever, they were definitely a major domino.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So the financial impact, as we're saying, because we are a sports business show. So if they lose 25% of the season, you're looking at a few $100 million for them in terms of ticket and gate revenue. Think like $400 million. But the media revenue, if you add up the $8 billion a year, take 25% of that is local revenue, and so now you're down to 6. If another 1 to 2 million is merchandising, you're really looking at half of their revenue is media. So if you take away 25% of half, you're looking at another couple $1 billion. So they could easily, if the worst case scenario happened, and the playoffs are a ton of money too, above and beyond that. So you're looking at a couple $1 billion in losses, I think, total for the NBA. I think Major League Baseball is in a little bit better position financially because they haven't even started their season yet. They could compress the schedule a little bit, lose a few games, lose a month of games, and probably be fine. Although they haven't really given a plan either. But I think Major League Baseball can still rescue their season. The NBA, I don't know. It's getting down to the point where they might not be able to rescue things.
Oh, the NBA and NHL are done. I don't, I don't know, how they deal with it. I just say it's an incomplete season or whatever, no champion crowned. I think best case scenario is everything starts to kind of come back online by early summer. I mean, who knows if they pick it up from there and try to finish it out, or if they just call it a day and plan for a new season. But I think both those leagues, I would highly doubt. I mean, this isn't the only thing that matters, but it's a good way to articulate it. I don't think we see champions for this season in either league.
I think they're playing games by May.
We'll see. I don't. I mean, I hope. Don't get me wrong. I'm not rooting.
I mean, again,
for that,
but
I don't think.
Oh, I know you're not. I know you're not. I think that the country cannot survive this sort of posture through summer. They can't. And by the way, I mean, if you look at China and South Korea have kind of recovered, from their kind of first wave, and it took China about 2 months, and they had a much greater outbreak than this country has had, at least to date. Much greater.
But they also did employ their communist totalitarian powers to.
Well, they also started it too.
But I'm saying,
I don't know.
I'm just saying that they took steps that our government, to your point about Gavin Newsom, you shouldn't take, right? So like they took drastic measures to stem it, and in some parts their cases are upticking again.
We also have a much better medical system than they do, though. Too, remember, and we're also. I think the country's better prepared. I think the country's generally much better prepared, for events like this than almost any country in the world. I do believe in American exceptionalism still, Chris. I know you're a commie, so you
Yeah,
might
I will
not,
agree
but
to disagree on that one. I think the idea of American exceptionalism is going to get its final stake to the heart here over the next couple of months.
oh, I think we're gonna prove our American exceptionalism.
All right, well, we'll check back.
Absolutely.
One interesting thing I saw in looking at the different numbers, kind of speaking with the two leagues that are the most impacted now, professional leagues, the NHL and the NBA, is a weird collective bargaining thing that the NBA actually had accounted for this and doesn't have to pay players' salaries at some point. The NHL has no. They actually have the exact opposite. The NHL as a league is on the hook for these players' salaries. They do not have a backdoor out.
Um, I don't know how much money the NHL has in reserve. The NBA can afford to pay their players. And they're such a player-friendly league that they probably will, I would assume. And again, as you said, I don't think we've heard anything about the NBA even trying to enact that provision. And so I think they'll just go ahead and pay their players. But NHL, I don't know how. It's got to be a huge economic, hit to them to have to pay their players. They need to be smarter, by the way. I mean, if the season's canceled, I don't know why they should have to pay their players. That's not exactly equitable for the owners either. Frankly. And now we can talk about the NFL here. We haven't even mentioned them. I think it's abundantly clear that the NFL has by far the least impact of any league in terms of economics, because what are they going to lose? They're going to lose the draft at this point. The draft is going to happen in April, but it's not going to be the whole big whiz bang show that they've always had. There will be some money lost on that, but even that, they could have the draft televised in the league offices and still put it on ESPN for 6 hours. And people are going to watch it. So I don't, because the hundreds of thousands of people partying in the street really isn't NFL money. That's local money. So they're really not going to lose much. As long as the season starts on time, which I think there's no doubt it's going to start on time.
Oh, there's doubt.
I think there's 100%. I'd bet the house that the NFL starts as normal in September. I'd bet the house, every penny I own, NFL will start in September. And if that happens, they're not going to lose a penny, really, of any kind of real money. So they might lose OTAs, but that's preparation, not money. They might lose training camps, dollars, but they're going to play games. And that's really all that matters in terms of finances.
We can, well, I mean,
at the house.
We don't, let's not do that, but we should find some funny gentleman's bet about if the NFL kicks off on its allotted date, which I
depends on what you mean by kick off, too. I'm saying NFL kicks off, fans in the stands, broadcasts on TV, right, everything
the Thursday, whatever
September.
The Thursday in early September that would be.
Yes.
All right. Well, you know what?
Well, let's contemplate it off the. You'll have to contemplate it off the air. Maybe.
Yeah, and tweet us at the Hogsty or It's Just Business, or if you've got funny ideas. But we should get some stupid gentleman's bet on that kickoff on that Thursday night.
And nobody's appearing naked anywhere, so don't even say
it. You don't want that. We don't want that. So
right.
That's a win-win. For
exactly.
That not to happen.
So if those suggestions will be politely ignored.
But I would be curious to see what people would come up with. It'll be interesting. You're exactly right, and through no other benefit than dumb luck, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the season starts, and that's what I'm saying. The season starts in the fall. They're going to play games. Games will happen.
Well, that's not. Now we have to qualify. Is our bet kickoff as planned, or games will happen?
I'm saying kickoff as planned.
Okay. Let's get that on tape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I wouldn't bet against games happening. I mean, this is a league of which I was, even as a New Yorker living through 9/11, voraciously was pro them kicking off. But was it 3 weeks they took off? I think they lost 3.
I think it was 2. I can't remember. I think it was 2.
Yeah, it was 3. It wasn't less than 2, and it wasn't greater than 3. But so this is a league that knows how to soldier on, and don't let any crisis go wasted.
So you haven't defined your position either, though. So what's your position on this? Because we don't even really have a bet yet. What are you saying?
Oh, I don't think. I think that I would bet my proverbial house that they do not kick off on their allotted date. Now, I would be far less confident to say games don't happen. I think those are two very distinct things. But I do think this is going to linger on. I do think it's going to wipe out a lot of the prep, training camp, OTAs, and we're a sort of a podcast network built on the backs of the Washington Redskins. So, team like the Redskins with a new coach, no OTAs, limited training camp is actually a pretty big negative, and it has issues with competitive balance. I think because of those things will be delayed, that they'll delay the start of the season to give some semblance of fairness and prep.
I think training camp goes as scheduled. I think the Hog Stye will be in Richmond in July, in August for that. I think games go as scheduled. I think the kickoff weekend is as per normal.
All right, there's the parameters.
Well, but I'm still not clear about what you're saying. Are you saying the games aren't going to happen at all?
No. I'm just saying it will not kick off as scheduled. It will be delayed. You'll see it weeks later. But no, I would not bet against games being played.
You're just saying it's going to be delayed from the early.
Yes,
I think it's second week in September.
It will not kick off as currently scheduled.
Right. That's the bet. So then we need somebody to give us terms that do not include nudity. Beyond that, we'll listen. So let's talk about the NCAA, Chris. It seems to me this is the biggest issue of all of them. Because the rest of the stuff, at the end of the day, these are private businesses, and if they went away, there's no real impact on society. I mean, it's a lot of money. By the way, I saw an interesting stat. The sports industry collectively is about a $160 billion thing. I think that was in the New York Times article, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The New York Times had that, and so what they're talking about is the league revenue, the media networks, which is TV, radio, internet, the travel, stuff, the hotels, the airlines, all of that total is $160 billion industry, which is bigger than what I thought it would be, to be honest. But the NCAA, I think, has the biggest problem. The NCAA canceled March Madness, and after Duke and Kansas canceled their seasons, they really had no choice at that point. That was the NCAA was done. And the reason why it's a problem is that March Madness is about $1 billion a year thing, a little over $1 billion to the money to the NCAA. And the NCAA distributes that money to all of their conferences, and then the conferences distribute that money to the schools. I think we had a segment on how that works in particular several months ago. So if they don't have that money, what you're looking at next year is a lot of underfunded little sports. The sports that aren't the income generating sports, volleyball, swimming. Swimming has a little bit of a national presence, to a certain extent, but track and field, the little sports like that. We don't know really the impact of it, but we know it's going to be underfunded unless they have to. I guess schools may have to tap their donor networks to get them funded, because the money ain't going to come from the NCAA.
I think I saw one stat. I think it was in one of the articles. I think it was the New York Times one that said that basically and I think they were combining the men and women's NCAA basketball tournament, because obviously men's is far superior in terms of its popularity and revenue generation. But if you look at the grand scope of NCAA sports, women's basketball is in that elite status for revenue generation. Without that tournament, both genders, that represents 3/4 of the NCAA's revenue.
Yeah, that's a large amount of money.
Basically 4-week stretch in March basically underwrites 3/4 of all of it.
That was why I was surprised that they canceled it so fast.
Well, they have liability issues that pro leagues don't have too.
They do, because they're public entities, and it's they all. That's why the FBI is investigating college basketball, because it all ties back to universities receiving federal funding, and so they do have more regulatory and legal issues and liability issues for sure. But I was kind of surprised that the NCAA didn't say, okay, we're going to take a hiatus, and I didn't see really the problem if they could have gotten the tournament in before the end of the school year, why they wouldn't have tried to do it, except for what you're saying, which is just liability issues. Because if you can't drag on college basketball into the summer, because at that point people have graduated. People are moving on. You can't do that. But I don't know why they didn't try to do it in May. Or again, why they at the beginning just said, "Oh, we're canceled." Why not just say we're going to postpone April and we're going to look at this again in a month?
We'll never know.
No, we'll never know. But I'm telling you guys, the economic impact of the tournament is going to be a much worse than any of these other pro leagues suspending or losing their seasons because of what Chris said. 3/4 of their funding comes from March Madness. That funding goes to universities. That funds the athletic departments for a whole lot of schools, and it funds sports for non-revenue generating sports for a whole lot of schools, and it's a major problem. And I can't imagine even wealthy boosters are going to be in the mood to donate too much money after losing a ton of income from the economy shutting down for an unknown period of time. So I don't know what they're going to do.
Well,
It's a big problem.
there's only so much money at this, but we're going to find out over the coming months and years. But I think what you'll see, if I could predict, is what you'll see in college athletics is the long tail sports and ones further down the tail will just go away. You'll see college and universities slicing the back third, maybe even back half of their sports programs and say, okay, field hockey or whatever, you can become an intramural sport, and there, but you won't be an official sport, and you'll see all of those sports start to just get lopped off and canceled. And all these colleges and universities can only make these decisions on their own, so it won't be uniform. But and depending on the finances of each school, you'll see all those sports start to get eliminated.
But the problem is you run into a Title IX issue. The government may have to make Title IX, may have to pass some exceptions to Title IX because they can't just lop off all the women's sports and keep college football and basketball. Because
No.
that's contrary to federal law, and so there's something has to give.
Or you'll see more men's margin. That's wrong. Smaller sports get cut, while the female equivalent might stick around.
What's more, I think more likely, unless Congress, gets their act together and starts to think about it. And Congress has, I have no faith in the ability of Congress to do anything, and so I don't think this is going to happen. But if they could pass a 2020 2021 limited number of exceptions to the Title IX requirements to allow schools to kind of balance it on their own while keeping the spirit and intent of the law intact would be helpful, but Congress isn't going to do that. So, yeah, what you may end up having to see is exactly what Chris said. Men's sports go away. All women's sports, the majority of women's sports stay in order to keep college football and men's college basketball and college football alive next season.
Yeah, and in bigger universities or whatever, they'll move to intramural status. It's not like they won't go away completely, but even though you look at something like intramural men's volleyball is actually pretty huge, but there's still a big difference between being an intramural sport and being an official sport of the university.
Yeah, and we're talking about things like wrestling, field hockey, even track and field, because once you get away from like the Penn relays and then the NCAA national championships, it's not a revenue generating sport beyond those two events. Because the Penn relays are really big, but then your volleyballs of the world, your men's volleyball especially, women's volleyball has a tiny little presence, but men's volleyball has almost none. And there's a lot of little sports, lacrosse. You may see a highlight on SportsCenter once a year. That's it. So there's a lot of little sports out there that are going to be affected by it. This is what we're talking about, the downstream effects of canceling March Madness. Has a much bigger impact on society than the NBA losing some salary cap, next year.
Yeah, and that doesn't even on any NCAA March Madness tournament and all the other things doesn't even we're not even starting to talk about that second and third layer, which is the bars and restaurants, the host city. Then you start the people that work the stadiums. It spirals out pretty far.
Well,
deep.
The other thing is, then if you lose scholarship money for some of these little sports, that increases, if the kids want to go to school, that increases debt, and that increases, the federal guarantees under FAFSA, because they're going to have to borrow money. And so that has an impact. And so it's just a never ending spiral. That's why I've continued to say The idea of just saying, "Oh, we're going to shut down the economy," people aren't thinking this through. There needs to be a better balance because you can't just the impact of shutting everything down for a month even is a huge downstream, down tail impact that I don't think anybody's really thought through. I mean, it's a really dangerous thing. And you can't just tell everybody just stop working. The country collectively cannot afford to do that for very long.
No, and yeah, we'll see. I mean, things even like 9/11 or even the financial crisis of 2008, things that had massive impacts, obviously, uh, didn't have the kind of, we're still somewhat contained or, hurt other sectors more than others or whatever. This really is blanket.
I mean, it's the only comparable event you could start to talk about is maybe the Great Recession in the 20s. In terms of impact. Because, yeah, 9/11, it was more sad and awful and tragic than it was impactful at the end of the day in terms of economic impact. I'm not minimizing the loss of life or anything like that, but economic impact. Some sports and entertainment shut down for a couple weeks, and that was it. And then it moved on. Um, and no hurricane has this kind of broad-based national impact. I lived through Hurricane Harvey, here in Houston, and the worst rainfall in the history of the country. And yeah, that sucked for a couple weeks, but it was limited to the city of Houston, and then it came back. But if you shut down the economy, you're talking about tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars. And the impact could last for years in terms of downstream. People are going to lose businesses. The impact of the in-state March Madness alone, Chris said it, the bars, the hotels, all that really hurts. And so the government cannot just expect people to continue in this posture for very long. At some point soon, you have to say, we're getting back to normal and we're going to do the best we can and let the chips fall where they may, I think.
Well, let's talk about the next big thing on the sports calendar, which is still right now set to go on as planned. And that, of course, is the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. Right now it's, outside maybe the start of the NFL season, it's the only thing that sort of hasn't buckled yet. And I'd say the pressure is mounting, and I pretty much, I don't think it's going to happen. And that one, that one is the kind of the granddaddy of financial blows, at least as like a one time thing, because the money that goes into that, the money that comes out of it, the what goes on in a local city. And this one, Tokyo, is a world-class city, so you're not talking about a place that has to invent infrastructure to host. The loss, the financial loss that would be represented by canceling the Olympics would be staggering, and it's definitely going to happen.
It'd be multiple tens of billions, and there's no reason whatsoever why they need to act now. There's no reason why the International Olympic Committee needs to say anything but we're evaluating the circumstances, and we will think about it as the Olympics get closer. Leave it at that. We're talking about July and August, right? Is that what you told me off the air?
Yeah,
July and
it's
August?
basically, it straddles the change of the month. It's like late July.
Okay,
or
all
August.
right. So, I mean, we're in March, people. There's no reason to cancel anything that's happening in July. That's crazy. Especially something that has that wide ranging of an economic impact on Japan, on American, sports media networks, and all sorts of things. There's no reason why they don't just say we're evaluating, period. And then once you get to maybe June, yeah, okay. But I think this is going to be over in June. So, I mean, but point is, whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know why anybody has to act at all right now. I think that's a dramatic overreaction. For
By
them to
the
cancel
time we
something now.
record the next show, the Olympics will be off, is my prediction.
Okay.
A. B, the interesting sports, and I'm not advocating canceling. So, but the interesting part from a sports and sports business perspective is, how do you do your qualifying competitions right now? Like, the 3 to 4 months leading into any Olympics is basically country specific qualifying meets, whatever, per the sport. So how do you even know, and how do countries even organize to field teams?
Well, a lot of countries don't have what the United States has. We have a lot of Olympic qualifying stuff for television reasons, okay? You could take the four best times run by the 100, run by 100-meter sprinters, for example, and throw them in the Olympics. Just off the top of my head. You could take the four best times in of the NCAA in the 2019 season, so you guys are there in the Olympic team. You could throw an Olympic team together. The qualifying stuff, yeah, ideally you'd want to have it, but I think the United States could throw teams together quickly just by using objective criterion that already exist. And little countries like you're not going to convince me that like Venezuela is having a huge, Olympic trials. They're throwing teams together from various other means. So yeah, that part different for sure.
But like
But
Brazil
they could.
does, right? Like if you look at the top 10 competitive countries, they don't look that different than the United States in terms of how they field a team.
You don't think Brazil already knows who their best Olympic athletes are at the various, at the various positions or various
No,
events?
I mean, yes, I'm sure they can. I mean, and if it and that's what those contingencies is exactly how they'll handle it. But they have to already be thinking about, there's
And they should
already
be
a bunch of
thinking
that stuff
about
in
it.
place to see, whether it's going to happen or not. And so my only point is it's not the Olympics aren't just a start date of July 28th or whatever. There's a whole ecosystem of things that are probably in flux right now. And yes, they could scramble, but we'll see. It'll be interesting because this is when we'll see how much the pressure of those things, and if you get a couple countries that are in the top 15 competitive countries start to pull out, like that'll be another thing to start to watch. Like a
I don't know,
country
man.
could say, we're not sending a contingency.
Listen, I mean, the Olympics went on in 1980 without the United States, and it went on in 1984 without the Soviet Union.
And it already
Yeah,
doesn't have Russia this year.
yeah, that Russian. But I don't think we've. This is a story we've missed on this show for some reason because we've had too many other things to talk about. But the short version of what Chris is talking about is that the International Olympic Committee banned Russia from all international competition for I don't remember the number of years off the top of my
I
head.
think it's
The
like
time.
5. I think it's a
Okay.
chunk.
Because it wasn't. They're not just roiding up. There's a huge national sponsored program to outright defraud the International Olympic Committee, in international sports. And so they have banned Russia from all competition. And there's I think they can send something like, don't quote me on the number, but something like 10 Russian athletes can participate. Something like that under a neutral flag. And that's what they're down to. So Russia's already out. But the Olympics can go on. Again, they went on in 1980 without the United States. They went on in 1984 without Russia. If Great Britain or whatever, Norway or whatever pulls out, it will go on. It can go on. It's only when you have mass numbers. If you're talking about Russia, the United States, Brazil, Great Britain, and you have like 10 or 11 of them, yeah, that's a problem. But I just think there's no reason to act right now. Why would you act when something's in July? Why would you commit yourself when we're talking about August? That's crazy. Just there needs to be plans. Countries need to plan, and figure out how to throw an Olympic team together, but they can do it, and they don't need to make a decision for a while.
Well, all of sports eyes will be watching because that really is the big one. The big one in the crosshairs. The NFL has a little bit more time, but I think especially and considering this is an international story, not a U.S. story exclusively. The Olympics, all eyes will be watching what happens over the next couple of weeks and months.
And the money involved is just a staggering amount of money. It dwarfs all the other sports put together. In terms of overall international economic impact, you could throw the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, international soccer all together. In total, they wouldn't equal what the international impact of the Olympics is globally. So it's a major thing, and that's why they're resisting, the tide of public pressure. And I would too. I would resist it too because this is just and people have panicked right now and about it and oh my God, cancel everything. Well, you know what? It's the third month of the year and we're talking about the eighth month of the year. Wait it out, see what happens, and make a decision later. Be calm and rational people. Don't overreact. Steve's wise words. Chris is looking at me like I'm looking at him. He's looking at me like I'm nuts. But I'm serious. Don't panic. Don't overreact. Don't cancel things that are supposed to happen in the summertime. Just get through this and see how we are in a month or two. Preach. Come on, preach with me, Chris.
Hey, listen, I would love for you to be right. I'm not going to, I don't necessarily intellectually think you are. I'm going to use the line that I've used about the Washington Redskins during the Daniel Snyder era and any move they make. I hope it works. I don't think it will.
At some point, Chris, I'm going to get you to say Dan Snyder's name right.
How do I say it?
You say it Schneider every single time since the dawn of this show. You have said Schneider. I don't really care. I just think it's funny that you just cannot pronounce the man's name.
I'm kind of famous for butchering names. It's one of my bits.
Okay, well, there you go. He's doing it on purpose, Chris, people. So, look, I mean, so we've gone over the economic impact of this. Certainly basketball, to summarize this, basketball is in danger of losing up to maybe $4 billion if things really went badly for him. Baseball has a little bit of time to kind of rescue the bulk of the season. The NFL probably isn't going to have a huge economic impact no matter what happens. Unless, if this thing grows to the Black Plague, yeah, all bets are off. But, I mean, assuming this is going to be over in a couple months, the games will go on one way or another. The Olympic Committee, the Olympics is the big one. So that's what can really hurt economically. So that's our take on it, on the coronavirus economic impact on sports.
Which will be, monumental. And, I think sports is no different than the rest of society. I mean, there are going to be many, many rules that'll need to be rewritten on the other side of this. So we will see. It won't give us a lack of content. And what's your favorite? What are you following any of the simulations of how the season would play out for the NBA, or watching rewatching old March Madnesses? Are you doing anything like that?
Let me be clear in saying I cannot express my contempt for simulated games enough. Okay? The depths of my contempt for that cannot be expressed in mere words. I utterly don't care. And no, I haven't watched a lot of the highlights of prior games and stuff. I mean, I see that ESPN in particular are playing old tournament games like from 2015 and 18 stuff. I haven't watched any of it because we know who wins, man. If you come up with like maybe Lakers Sixers in the 2000 finals or 1999 finals, and that what year that was, I might watch that. But absent something I really care about, like if they show a Redskins Super Bowl, I might watch that. But I'm just not. If I know the result, it just doesn't interest me that much, and I utterly don't care whatsoever about somebody basically playing Madden football or Madden basketball or whatever, Y2K on television is what it boils down to. Utterly don't care, so no.
I don't disagree. I don't mind playing those games if
sure, yeah, have fun, but I'm not watching it.
That doesn't watching them or seeing the results of hyper computer analytics spit out what would happen is not entertaining.
It means absolutely nothing. Exactly, it does nothing for me.
And even I would agree. Even yes, would I tune in? Would I watch maybe a minute of an old Super Bowl or something like that? Yeah, maybe. But I'd much rather. I know a lot of people are starting to pressure ESPN to release that Michael Jordan documentary early.
Yeah.
Now kind of sports documentaries.
That's another story.
That would be missing my sports content whole. That would be my preferred option.
If you ask me, I think ESPN needs to ring up their Disney overlords and start getting them to kick over some rights to show some movies, sports movies.
Yeah,
ESPN
totally.
isn't going to be able to keep this up for very long. They can show every 30 for 30 documentary they have. They're eventually going to run out of content in a couple months, and they can't just run SportsCenter over and over again. So I think you need to get The Rookie and whatever Disney sports movies they have.
Right,
they need to start showing
three-quarters of the world's IP. They should be able to figure it out.
Exactly right, because like MLB Network shows repeated showings of the rookie over and over and over again in the offseason. If anybody's noticed, the Golf Channel plays Tin Cup over and over and over and over again. Over and over, like every night is Tin Cup. And the rookie, there's more baseball. I don't know why MLB only has the rookie. There's other baseball movies, but that's going to be ESPN here if this thing goes on too much longer. Either that or it's going to become the UFC network. That's the other thing they could do. Really focus on the UFC.
Oh, I guess the last I heard was WrestleMania. Actually, WrestleMania might be the first
WrestleMania's on.
Right, but no audience, right? Just broadcast. Yeah.
See, that's my point. Why can't that happen for a variety of sports? Why can't that happen? WrestleMania apparently is going to split over a couple days, and they're going to film it in the WWE gyms. Why can't they have matches go on? And yeah, that's a show, and we know it's not sports, but that's not the point. They're having the events go on in limited capacity, and they're going to film it, and people will appreciate the content. Quite honestly, hell, I might even watch it at that point if I'm bored enough.
Speaking of Vince McMahon, I mean, can we just talk about we've both Steve and I have laughed at alternative football leagues pretty much the entire time the show is run. But man, you got to talk about like the idea of having a competing football league now going on. I think World Football League was in the 70s, so going back 40 years, the idea, just no league will ever succeed. And like even when this one had like a spark, like nope, here comes a global pandemic. It just don't start alternative football leagues.
There's no way it's gonna work. Yeah. And the ratings, by the way, and we're running out of time here, but and I've got another show to do in 10 minutes, Chris.
Okay.
The XFL ratings were going down and down and down every week. Okay, they started off in week number 1. We didn't talk about this, on the show because we're not going to waste too much time on alternative sports leagues. And Alex isn't here. Alex Lease isn't here. They start out like 3 million viewers for week number 1 for some of these games, and it's dwindled all the way down to less than 1 million before the league canceled. So yeah, I mean, it's not going to work even in the best of times. In the best of circumstances, alternative football just doesn't work. And unless your name is Alex, you know this. And then, Vince gets a tiny bit of interest that was waning as it was, and then the global pandemic just smashes it to bits.
And the only thing that they were doing remotely well from a business standpoint, I literally watched about 1 minute, so I can't judge the football.
It sucked.
Was that they were doing pretty good at gate receipts. So
right.
Whoops,
it was okay. Yeah. They were kind of they were averaging 10 to 15,000,
but it was their
in
only
some cities, and then Seattle was getting like 20.
Yeah, but it was their only bright spot by week 4 or 5, and then that was.
And it wasn't even really that bright, to be honest. They weren't selling out stadiums either. It was not going to work long term.
No, but act of God made sure to put the final capper on that.
You will not play football outside of the NFL. Somehow, I think maybe the NFL is, bribe Jesus Christ, maybe.
Right.
Who's up there, if you're a Christian out there, you believe in Jesus Christ and all of that. And I think maybe the NFL has written God a huge check and just said, God, whatever their deity of choice is, let me say it like that. There is a check out there that has been cashed that the NFL has written to prevent any alternative football league from ever succeeding.
And even when they lose in court, their damages are famously
$1. Exactly.
All right, well, with that, we will sign off from our bunkers. Steve, tell us about the Hogside Network's programming.
The Hogside Network is soldiering on despite the global pandemic going on. Seasons of Discontent is coming back this week, people. So Rick Snyder's look on all things sports and life will continue. I'm sure his sarcasm will get to epic levels this week with no literal sports going on. We'll see. The Hogside goes on. We have written content every day. We're covering free agency as we speak. So stick to us for all things sports and life that we can possibly dream up.
They'll explain to you exactly who the hell are these players the Washington Redskins are signing.
We've written up. Steve, has written up. Thanks everybody else for helping me do it. Has written up write-ups on all of them so far.
All the Wesses. All right, so we will see you in 2 weeks. Stay safe, stay healthy, everybody.